You've written extensively for antiwar.com. You are on the board of Veterans for Peace, to name but a few. I am sure that you have many other anti-war efforts that I haven't included here. But before that, you actually served for 10 years in the Marines, including 2 tours of Iraq, finally resigning in protest of the US-led war on Afghanistan. What led you to join the Marines in the first place? And how did you come to your decision in 2009 to resign? Was there a specific catalyst? I read your resignation letter, so I understand why, but was there something specifically that just clicked for you?
No, there wasn't one thing. I didn't turn a corner and see something and that was it. It was more a progression over time that begins even before I joined the Marine Corps, but that is a steadily advancing descent in my mind over what we were doing and what I was doing with those wars. One of the things that happens, of course, is that as things come up, as you have this dissonance occur between your participation in the wars and what's occurring there, you make excuses for yourself, or you apologize for it, or you bargain with yourself. And that's certainly what occurred to me for many years. I joined the Marine Corps after college. I worked for a couple of years in finance and was essentially bored, wanted to do something bigger with myself. This was getting into the late 90s. So I go to officer candidate school for the Marine Corps in January 1998. And my understanding of the world was naive, to put it that. I was well read, well educated. I should say that well read and well educated in with what you could call, I guess, the establishment canon. So I had subscription to the New York Times, subscription to The Economist and to The Atlantic. So in imperial, if you want, imperial thought, I was well steeped. But in terms of dissenting views or views that came from the margins or the fringes or from the outside, no, those weren't things I was familiar with. I mean, so I don't read any Noam Chomsky or Howard Zinn until I'm in my late 30s, probably. I mean, I know who they are, certainly understand their role in our society, but I don't see their views as being relevant to me, my life, and my world outlook. And so, anyway, I joined the Marine Corps and I joined again, went to Officer Candidate School in January 1998. And as I said before, it's a steadily advancing understanding of my role in the larger imperial scheme, if you will. So, one of the things important for me, actually, in that development of my understanding of what's occurring, that because I think, Ileana, a lot of generations are guilty of this, or I should say all generations are guilty of this, where you think that your generation won't commit the same mistakes, errors, crimes that previous generations did. You think that you are somehow special and disconnected from the continuous line of history, that somehow your generation won't do what previous generations did. And that's what my belief was, as well as coupled with this idea that we were in a new world order, that yes, the history of the United States was besmirched, if you will, to put it politely, with the conquest of North America, the genocide of Native Americans, the enslavement of Africans, certainly the conquest of lands outside the United States that begin in earnest once the continental portion of the empire is complete, almost immediately. I mean, it's roughly in the same year or two that the last Native American tribe is subjugated by the American government, that you have the takeover of Hawaii. So I understood all that, but again, thinking that somehow my generation was removed from that. And especially since this was post-Cold War, we're in a new world order. And so I really did believe that the role of the United States militarily abroad would be as we saw it in the 1990s, whether it's military actions that were humanitarian, in quotes, in nature, like Somalia or even Yugoslavia, or the utilization of the Marines in particular for things like evacuating embassies from places like Liberia or Haiti, or doing humanitarian relief operations like was done in Bangladesh. You know, those are all things that were occurring right before I went into the Marine Corps or during my first year or two in the Marine Corps. And so that's what I believed, again, naively and stupidly, that this is what it would look like. And of course, getting into the wars and seeing that the wars were no different than the other wars and operations and coups and invasions and occupations, as well as the motivations for them. But you lie to yourself continuously, and particularly when you understand the bigger issue at stake, when you understand that what you are doing is just supporting and serving an imperial project, you begin to then bargain with yourself personally. And so you tell yourself, okay, well, even though the war is immoral, I'll be a moral actor, which is maybe the most naive thing I possibly embraced. The idea that somehow I would be a moral actor in war. It's impossible. The war makes you its agent. All right. So you serve the purposes of the war's immorality. And you can make these bargains, these excuses, apologies all the way. As one is eviscerated, your mind creates another excuse or an apology. And so eventually I do two, as you said, twice to Iraq. During all that time, I'm also doing policy work on the wars in Washington, D.C. So when not deployed, I'm working on the wars there. And, then I go to Afghanistan 2009. At that point, I had gotten out of the Marine Corps and I was a State Department officer. And when I get to Afghanistan, I'm completely intellectually and morally broken. And what I'm resting my hopes on, if you will, is the idea that somehow the Afghan war is going to be different than the Iraq war. And of course it wasn't. I mean, that's if there was a eureka type of thing, as you were asking before, if there was something that made me snap, it was, I guess, that understanding that the war in Afghanistan was fundamentally no different than the war in Iraq. The Obama administration was fundamentally no different than the Bush administration. And so, yeah, in September of 2009, I resigned my position there in Afghanistan in protest over the escalation of the war by the Obama administration, essentially because the effort is futile, it will be counterproductive, and it's serving no interests of the Afghan people or the American people, but only the interests of either the White House or various benefactors, that we could loosely title the military industrial complex.
It's interesting because I think in hindsight, of course, I think we have a lot more knowledge now with WikiLeaks, revelations, etc. But I'm thinking, I'm calculating with my math skills that you would have joined the Marines in like 1999, right? If you
19, January 1998, yeah. Yeah, so right beginning
98,
of that. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So therefore, that's a completely different time in terms of awareness around things.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking the dial-up internet, so you're running at that point the cord from your computer to the jack in the wall. You can get your news off the internet, but it's slow. It's a lot easier to read a newspaper or to watch CNN. Certainly no cell phones. And it was a different world at that time. And again, you have to emphasize January 98, the Soviet Union flag at the Kremlin had been pulled down December of 91. So you had happened essentially 6 years and 1 month before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it really truly was, not to make excuses, but to just put the context there. It really truly was this, again, new world order that people had either aspirations about, hesitations about, anticipation of. But it was something that it was a time that I think maybe similar to now, except the structures being removed are not nearly as concrete. The disappearance of the American empire, the diminishment or the, weakening of it, certainly not as grand or dramatic and as quick as the Soviet Union's collapse, but it's there. And so we are a similar type of time now where we see a shifting of the world order that I think will be as significant as what we saw in 1990, 1991.
And there's also, I mean, I'm hearing things like there's a recruitment is somewhat down, the military. It's like a different type of, it's not maybe as prestigious to enter the military at this point. Is that true?
They've had, yeah, the U.S. military's had issues with recruitment. Now the last couple of months have been better, and they actually have better numbers for the past year. The Army did not miss its quota like it had the previous years, but the U.S. military has been struggling with recruitment issues for 15 years now. Since the first couple years of the Iraq War, the U.S. military has been struggling with meeting its needs in terms of personnel to the point that they're recruiting people that they said they never would recruit before in terms of qualifications, whether it be mental health issues, whether it be criminal histories, whether it be ability to pass the various tests that you take before you go into the military, whether they be physical or educational tests. So they've really been stretching to try and make their mission. And a number of reasons for that. The Republicans will say it's because the military is too woke, which is just nonsense. I mean, military does surveys as to why people don't want to join the military. And the number one issue keeps coming up over and over again. People don't want to get killed. The military certainly doesn't ask. The Department of Defense certainly doesn't ask, as serving the interests of the empire, one of the reasons why you don't want to join. But you could see that within the answers that people would select that if they would, as well as just, yeah, more straightforward, germane, like, I don't want to get killed. I don't believe in this. So it has been a real challenge for them. And one of the reasons I think why there are not just limited to Donald Trump, but those within Washington, D.C. who view his rollback, if you will, or realignment, probably a better way to put it, of the American empire from places like Europe and the Middle East as a consequence of the fact that the United States military can't actually do its job in the way it's told it's supposed to do it because it simply doesn't have enough troops. I mean, the Navy is the best case and example. The Navy doesn't have enough sailors to man its ships. So, you hear a lot in the United States about how the United States Navy is so small now compared to its preceding years, the preceding eras. And, the reality is even if you did have a magic wand and able to build all these ships, because the whole issue of construction of these ships is another big problem for the Department of Defense. They just can't build ships. There are always overruns in cost. They take forever to build. And then when they do build them, they don't work. I mean, this has been the reality of naval shipbuilding for 20 years now. But even if you erase all that, say they could get their act together and they could build ships, they don't have the sailors to man them. So it's a big issue for the American government and the Department of Defense because I think whatever bump you saw in recruiting numbers, even if it lasts for a year or two, it will go back to where it was.
Oh, so what do you think is the reason for the bump in recruiting numbers?
There's a substantial bump following the election that the Trump administration is saying it's because people want to serve in the military under Donald Trump. That's the line coming from the US government right now. I don't know if there's any data to support that at all. Possibly you do have some out there who are true believers, who are loyal MAGA members who, this is my chance to serve Donald Trump. Perhaps there's some. But I think it's probably more to do with the way that the military has shifted its focus in recruiting, its increase of bonuses that it's offering people, the way it's gone about recruiting, its lowering of its standards to allow, as I said before, people in who wouldn't have been qualified to be in before. And so I think you're seeing that bump because of a host of different things, because they really have been sinking a lot more money into this. They really have been putting a lot of effort. This is an existential issue for the military. And so I think that they're going to get a plus up in their recruiting numbers in the next, maybe even through the next year or two, as I said, because of their shift in strategy and their shifted, just recruiting tactics, if you will. But I think eventually that's going to then even out again. And you'll have this issue where even though the U.S. military, by historical comparison, is smaller than it's ever been, it's been since before World War II, I think you'll have continue to have this issue.